Hello everyone, I am Inverse, and finally, after, God, I don't even know, 3 months maybe? 2 months? Something ridiculously long, I am finally back with some more videos. I am finally going to be finishing the Volks Volks Sniper MG Build Order Breakdown series, and this will be the second last video in that series. There will be one more that I will be posting tomorrow, highlighting Seph's Volks Volks Sniper MG style. I'll be looking at 2 of Seph's games, provided I can find 2. It might end up just being 1. But today I'm going to be looking at a couple of Aimstrong's games from the most recent patch. Aimstrong, as many of you know, a very good Company of Heroes player, notably known primarily for his Volks Volks Sniper MG Wehrmacht play. He was the player who, I would say, popularized Volks Volks Sniper MG even more so than Seph, who created it, just because he very prominently won a lot of very big matches and played incredibly well in tournaments with this strategy. There was a time when nobody ever could beat Aimstrong with this strategy, and of course times change, the metagame changes, patches change, and it's not the only strategy Aimstrong does anymore. And Aimstrong himself has actually modified it slightly, which we will see in the second game. But without further ado, let's get into this first game. It is Aimstrong up here on the North of Semois, going up against Epsilon Seph. This is a year old or so, slightly under a year old replay from, I believe it is a Sunday Night Fight from the most recent season. And both of these games are going to be from North Semois, and the reason for that is I did not do any video analysis of my own games from North Semois because I personally dislike this map and the starting positions for this strategy. Now Aimstrong, as many of you also know, but many of you probably do not, this was for a very long period of time his absolute best map for Volks Volks Sniper MG. This was the map he made his name on. He absolutely loved this map. So it seemed, judging by results and judging by how well he played it for Volks Volks Sniper MG. So we're going to take a little bit of a look at what he does to give himself such an amazing advantage on a map like this, where I know myself personally find it very difficult to play. Now we're going to see a fairly standard capping order. We see this a lot more now recently. This has really come back into style, this kind of capping order. If we look at the tactical map, the Pioneer, the built Pioneer, is going to head straight up here, going to cap this. You don't always have to wire it off. Aimstrong in this game electing to wire off this fuel point, caps this, and then he's going to retreat to his base and then come over here and cap this. That way he can get a Pioneer right down here and get a little bit of forward map control very early in the game. Now this is one of the main problems with Volks Volks Sniper MG on this map, is the fact that you have this right hand side area and you have this middle, and they're separated by this hedge and this water right here, and of course there's these chokes down there and over here. That makes it very difficult for a standard Volks Volks Sniper MG to hold any ground, just because you're going to have your opponent flanking from around here, you can come around here, you can even come here, and then there's of course this area here and this area here. Now Aimstrong mitigates this to a certain degree by having his first Pioneer get down to this area as quickly as possible. He gets map control because of this, he gets vision because, as you can see a little bit around each of these resource points, so he's able to react a little bit quicker to any sort of rifle harass, any sort of flanking, or anything like that. We're also going to see in a second here a little bit of wire placed down here. Now I definitely feel wire is an extremely crucial part of this strategy on this map. If you do not wire, you're going to have a very difficult time defending flanks and defending harassment in the early game. Now as you'll notice, we haven't seen any rifles. This is a kind of unorthodox, strange opening for Seph. This was back in the phase of his playing career where he elected for a, I believe it was 3 engineer weapon support center start on this map, though it might have been 4 engineer. I think it was 3 engineer weapon support center, and he would build, as you can see right there, you can actually see it through the fog of war, he would build a MG emplacement, which is right here. If we pop it off, there it is, the MG emplacement. He would build that right here to defend his cutoff and then go for a super fast M8. Now, I never understood personally why he enjoyed this so much. He never really had too much success with it, at least in tournament games. He may have had a lot of success. Actually, I'm sure he had a lot of success in practice games, otherwise he would not have done this. But regardless, I still feel this game gives a good look at how Aimstrong likes to set up a Volks Volks Sniper MG in the early game, even though it isn't against any sort of rifle pressure. And with that in mind, we are going to speed up this replay in a few seconds. I'm not going to be watching through this one entirely at 1x speed, just because after the early game, it's kind of a strange mid and late game because both players do things that you don't really see anyone do right now for a number of reasons. It's not the most effective, it doesn't seem to be the most effective, and people just don't play quite like this anymore. Observation post down here. So with that in mind, let's speed things up a little bit, get up to 4x. And we're going to pay attention mostly to how Aimstrong transitions out of this, because transitions out of this, because even though Seph did something kind of strange and unorthodox in his early game, he still transitions out of it into a fast M8, and from that point it becomes a slightly more standard game. And we're going to see how Aimstrong, because of his ability to retain this field and now get this observation post up, is going to transition out of this not into tier 3 or even a heavy tier 2, but into a super light tier 2. Just a single pack, no grens, and instantly tier 4 as fast as possible, which is an excellent way to transition out of an opening like this on this map against what his opponent is doing. Against any sort of fast motor pool play, when you go tier 2 straight after your initial opening, it is never ever a bad idea. And in fact, a lot of very top players, you'll see this a lot in tournament play, a lot in the more recent tournaments, a lot of Wehrmacht players have been favoring tier 4 on this map in particular. It used to be a common notion that tier 4 was generally inferior to tier 3 just because tier 3 could do everything tier 4 could do earlier and for a cheaper cost. Now that's generally the case. However, on a map like this, where it's extremely easy for an American player to turtle to snipers, which can be very difficult for a heavy tier 2, tier 3 player to deal with, because it's very difficult to make use of tier 3 units like Pumas and Stugs, but mainly Pumas effectively on a map like this, just because there's a lot of narrow cutoffs, a lot of narrow chokes, like around here. There's a lot of shot blocking in terms of these hedges, and let me just slow this down to 1x while I talk here. A lot of shot blocking in terms of the hedges down here and all these buildings in the middle. Buildings here, even the hedge up here, and the buildings up here. It's very difficult to use Pumas extremely effectively unless you already have a massive advantage in the early game. Now if you go tier 4, you have Ostwins, which are far more durable and which can put on a lot more offensive pressure to your opponent, especially if he sits back and tries to get up snipers, which is what Seph is going to be doing in the near future in this game. So we have, where's the pack? We do have one pack out against the M8, and we're already teching up to tier 4. And we're going to have tier 4 out probably up around the 12-minute mark would be my guess. And that's a very quick tier 4. So let's kind of speed things up right now. Just kind of sitting back. Seph is going to be transitioning into snipers, as we see right here. I don't believe he has any on the field yet. He has one sniper, two snipers. So 2 snipers and 2 M8s. So this is a very manpower efficient, I suppose is the best way to put it, strategy by Seph. His thought is that he's using high cost units that do not cost anything at all to reinforce and cost very little, relatively speaking, to repair. That's in terms of the M8s being very, very cheap to repair, and the snipers, of course, not costing anything at all to reinforce. And he's just going to kind of play off this for a little bit. I'm not really going to get too much into the specifics of the strategy right now, except to comment on the super quick Osman. You see Osman coming out 1330, and if we look at what Seph has on the field right now, 2 M8's not going to really do anything against the Ostwins. Doesn't have any sort of AT at this point, solid AT at least. Definitely does not have any rifle squads for sticky bombs or anything like that to help as support. So this is just a very, very smart follow-up to most American plays at this point in the game in most situations. Just because generally you're going to see a very, very fast M8 come out against Wehrmacht on this map, and then you're going to see the American player transition into rifle upgrades and snipers. And in order to counter that, going Pumas is simply far too fragile and far too difficult to actually do on this map. It's a lot easier to go for Osmans. Now, in some situations, Pumas are going to be superior because of the speed they come at, and we're going to see that next game. A situation where Pumas are definitely superior to Ostwins, and a situation where Pumas actually do extremely well and win a game. But in this situation, just given the early game and the transition that Seph chose, it was very, very intelligent of Aimstrong to go for this sort of tier 4 play. And with that in mind, we're just going to speed through things, watch stuff explode, because I don't believe I actually have anything else very constructive and productive to say about this game. There's a lot of snipers, there's stuff dying, stuff blowing up, Ostwins driving and stuff. No veterancy because a lot of manpower is being spent on Ostwins and Knights Cross holders and stuff like that. Not too much available for veterancy, though we are going to hopefully see it in the near future. We do have a Sturmarmory coming up for Nebelwerfers, which is always a good idea on this map. Nebelwerfers definitely, or at least probably, the single most effective tier 3 unit for Wehrmacht on this map, just because of how ridiculously compact this center is, how many buildings there are, and how easy it is for you to deal significant damage with your Nebelwerfers. Just because your opponent has a very narrow spread that he can be in at any given time. So we're going to see an M8, and it's running around. And there's an Ostwind doing fancy micro stuffs. And that's 3 snipers and a Firestorm. So we see a right-hand side terror strat right now, which is very interesting. And that's about it. So if nothing happens in the next minute, I'm just going to close this game, because there's nothing else to say. Alright, that's good for game number 1. Let us head on to game number 2. Alright guys, welcome back. We're going to go into game number 2 here of Aimstrong's Wehrmacht play from North Semois. So let's get into it. This game is going to be slightly different from the previous one. We're going to see an American player, who in this case is Symbiosis. This is from the most recent WMD Invitational Tournament. I recommend you check out all the games. There were some very, very good games, very, very good series in that tournament. So do definitely check that out. All the replays are up on Game Replays. This is going to be a slightly different game from the previous one. We're going to see a far more standard style of American play, and a little bit of a deviation from Aimstrong's standard Volks Volks Sniper MG based on a few different factors. Just going to speed things up. At first, we're going to notice the same kind of capping order that Aimstrong favored in his game against Seph. Retreating that Pioneer after capping, not wiring off this time, electing to get a slightly quicker cap on that munitions point. And now what he's doing right now is, if you cap this VP with that very, very early Pioneer squad and then immediately cap this munitions point, by the time your Volks squad comes down and caps this strap point, this munitions point is going to I think it's going to just have finished completed. It's either that or it's going to just be finishing completion. Now, of course, this Jeep's going to kind of throw a wrench into things and going to delay this Volks from capping for just a little bit. Not too big of a deal, however. This is a very, very important thing to look for because it's one of the possible reads for Aimstrong's alteration in his strategy, because we're going to see, instead of Volks Volks Sniper MG, we're going to see Volks Volks MG Sniper. Now, this is never a bad idea to do against a super duper early Jeep, which in this case was almost certainly Jeep first after either 2 or 3 engineers. Main reason for that being the super early timing and the fact that it was used super aggressively in order to try to harass a capping squad. Now, paying attention to Aimstrong's kind of positioning at this point in the game, we have his one Volks in the middle and his second Volks sticking around the middle but kind of bouncing back and forth. You saw him heading up here for a second and then noticing he should be able to easily deal with this rifle squad by himself. Or, yeah, this Volk should be able to deal with this rifle squad by himself. So instead, going to come down here and see if he can catch anything over on this right-hand side, and he does manage to catch an engineer. Now, Jeep is going to come in and do a little bit of harassment, so Aimstrong going to probably want to get out of here very quickly, though he does have a MG on the field and en route, so he probably won't have to fully retreat. Is going to back up, however, which isn't a bad idea at all. Volks squad managed to force a retreat on that engineer, almost killed it, so he's now going to head back into the middle, try to do a little bit of support work, and help out this Volks engineer, or pile rather, and MG squad in the middle right now. We do have the rifles, or not the rifle, the sniper on the way, and we're going to see where Aimstrong elects to focus his attention on this map in this situation, because as you'll notice, when you don't wire off up here, and even when you do wire off up here, engineers can of course cut the wire, you fragment yourself extremely so when you have your plus 10 fuel up here, which is really your only significant source of fuel. You have this plus 5 as well, but it's not nearly as effective, and it's not nearly as much. Obviously, this being twice as much as that. And however, the distance between this center area, which is essential to a Wehrmacht player controlling, as well as this right-hand side area, which has vital munitions, this plus 16 munitions point, is extremely, extremely important for any Wehrmacht play. Same with this plus 16. As I mentioned in my previous videos, if you start on the bottom, these areas and these areas are both extremely important, which means if you're going to focus on one, most likely, against a good player, you're going to have to give up the other, which in this case is what is going to happen up here. We see this engineer going up here, harassing this plus 10 fuel. There's no real way for Aimstrong to counteract this, because if we look at what he has in the middle, he's just gotten his tier 2 tech up, or at least his tier 2 upgrade up. He can't push back here, because if he pushes back here, these rifle squads, engineers, all these units are going to push up and completely take the middle, and then it's going to be very, very difficult for him to take it back. Now, instead, what Aimstrong has elected to do is push aggressively toward the front and take this cutoff, because he's going for a tier 2 style of play, which doesn't require fuel. However, the very important thing to think about is the fact that he doesn't need this fuel point, but what he does need to do is deny his opponent that fuel point. Because if his opponent can get 2 plus 10 fuels up against Aimstrong's plus 5 fuel, things are not going to end well for Aimstrong. It's going to be very, very, very easy for Symbiosis to tech to whatever he pleases and do absolutely anything he wants in the mid game, just because he has such freedom with all the fuel he'll have. And that's just not a good situation for a Wehrmacht player to be in, especially on this map where AT gun placement and maneuvering can be slightly difficult to deal with. It can be a little tough to successfully and intelligently place AT guns, and artillery is so incredibly powerful that it makes AT guns a lot more difficult to deal with as well. So we are going to have a Grenadier first out of the Krieg Barrack. That's never a bad idea against an early Jeep play, because that tends to slightly delay your M8 as an American player, at least unless you only go for 3 rifles, in which case you are going to find it extremely difficult to be aggressive and to do anything offensive in your early game, especially if you lose that Jeep, which was the case for Symbiosis here. So we do have a fairly solid contain on this bottom right now for Aimstrong. He does have his MG right here. He's got a mine. Now he is going to have to worry about any sort of transgressions into his territory on the right hand side down here, which is most likely where Symbiosis is going to try to push next. However, as long as he is able to delay for as long as possible and get the tech and get the units out that he needs, you'll see a pack coming out second, because of course we haven't seen any sort of weapon support center or bar tech just yet. So until Aimstrong can be absolutely positive of what he is coming up against, he's going to be as safe as possible, and safe in this situation is getting a pack right about now. That's perfect timing. Even if his opponent had gone for an M8, he should be able to delay it long enough to get this out and into position in a timely manner. Now he has managed to cap a lot of the map, and his opponent is being suspiciously passive. Now as we see right here, it's finally been revealed there is a weapon support center. That is what Symbiosis has decided to tech to instead of an M8, instead of any sort of rifle upgrades. So with that in mind, Aimstrong is going to get a half track and then instantly tech up to tier 3 once he has the resources. Now the half track is an interesting choice. Without asking him, I tried to get in contact with Aimstrong before the recording of this episode but wasn't able to. So because I really wanted to ask him the motivation behind this half track, because in my opinion there's two possible reasons for him getting that half track at this point in time. One of them, he just wanted to get it all along. Half track's very, very good in the mid game, in even the semi-early game, which is what we're kind of still in right now, just before the 10-minute mark. Half track's very, 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 very good, and very annoying for your opponent to have to deal with. You know, he's actually putting an MG in there. That's funny. I actually didn't notice that before, but that's kind of interesting. So there's that reason, is simply the fact that that was in his plan all along. There is the fact that his opponent invested in weapon support center tech, which means he's absolutely not going to have a motor pool. If we look back in Symbiosis' base, he does have a supply yard, he does not have a motor pool, so there's no hard counter to this half track yet. There's no bars either, which is the soft counter to half tracks, and although there might be mines down, there actually probably is a mine right here, and there is a mine right... No, there wasn't. Never mind. I'm a liar! Don't listen to me, guys. Aside from mines, there's really nothing that can deal significant damage to this half track right now, and Aimstrong knows that. Of course, with bars, you can kind of handle half tracks a little bit easier as an American player, but the weapon support center pretty much guaranteed the absence of bars for at least a little bit longer. Tier 3 finishing up right now. And the third reason is a weapon support center most times, as in I'd say 90% of the time against Americans, is going to entail a sniper at some point, and a half track is very, very useful against any sort of sniper play, simply because it allows your grenadiers, it allows your Volks, it allows all of your infantry to remain on the field for as long as possible. The main difference between American play and Wehrmacht play, and the way their half tracks kind of operate, is the fact that American healing is base side in terms of triage. You always want to retreat at least as much as possible as an American player, because you want to gain the advantage of that free healing. And even though it will cost you some time and it will cost you some map presence, you'll save more than enough manpower to make it absolutely worth it. Wehrmacht, on the other hand, can heal through medkits, which of course are on the field. They can heal with veterancy, and the only thing they gain from retreating is the retreat defense bonuses. They don't gain anything else. It takes time, you lose map control, you lose map presence, and you only gain a little bit of defensive bonuses, which generally speaking aren't all that important unless you've really, really screwed up and you're about to lose a squad. So with that in mind, half tracks being far, far more useful for Wehrmacht than Americans, at least for the purposes of reinforcing. But as we see, we're going to have the Sturm Armory out, so a slightly shortened tier 2 for Aimstrong, and the main reason for that was the fact that he was able to secure so much map control with that shortened tier 2. his opponent couldn't really be aggressive because a early weapon support center tech doesn't really allow for a whole heck of a lot of aggression, especially when you go mortar first. It's very, very good against a super passive American player, or Wehrmacht player rather, but if you don't get a lot of damage done, it can be very, very difficult to actually push forward and take territory with a weapon support center follow-up to an early game. So Aimstrong was able to keep almost all of his map control and actually gain a lot more map control than a Wehrmacht player will generally have on Semois, and that gave him the confidence to cut short his tier 2 by 1 unit. Generally you want 2 Grens in a pack before you tech up to tier 3. Instead, Aimstrong elected for the super, super fast tier 3, get a super fast Puma, and now he's going to go back and get that second Gren. So going to shore up his mid game a slight amount by getting that extra Gren, just to add a little bit of infantry stability to his units in the mid game, and also gain the benefit of that super duper early Puma, which he is going to try to be as aggressive as possible with, given what Symbiosis has shown and Symbiosis' position and the general position of the game. Now, important thing to note, this rifle squad's health, no triage center yet. If we look in the base, this is probably going to mean tank depot plate. We see triage center just going up right now. That's a super, super late triage, and that generally means there's going to be a lot of fuel saved up. Now, electing for a triage before any sort of tech when getting the triage that late is a little bit strange to me. So I'm not really sure if it has to do with a lack of manpower from having to reinforce a lot or something like that. I'm not really sure. I'd have to go back and watch the game from Symbiosis' perspective in order to really have a good idea of the reasoning behind that. But as we are going to see in a second, Symbiosis is going to try for a tank depot follow-up to this, and with a Puma in your base and no AT, not really going to work out so well. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit because there's a second Puma on the field. There's still no tank depot up. All the engineers are dying, and Symbiosis is going to be forced out of this game extremely quickly. Dum-de-dum-de-dum, stuff dying. He's really trying to kill this rifle. Kill the rifle! Ah! No? Oh my god, oh my god. Oh, there it is. Poor rifle. Sad panda rifle. And that's going to be it. GG coming out from Symbiosis. And there we have it. So, that concludes the Aimstrong portion of our Volks Volks Sniper MG look at prominent players in the Company of Heroes community using the strategy, how they adapt to it, how they follow it up, how they like to play it out, where they like to focus, where they like to set up, all sorts of things like that. I hope you found that interesting, entertaining, enjoyable, educational. I hope you found that voice crack also interesting, educational, and enjoyable. And I will be back tomorrow with a game or two of Seph's Volks Volks Sniper MG, which will wrap up this build order breakdown series. Thank you for watching, guys. As always, feel free to subscribe if you enjoy what you see. Check me out on Twitch TV. Now that I am back at school, I will be streaming every day around 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I have no idea what it is in Europe, so I'm sorry, guys. I am an ignorant Canadian. I apologize. Follow me on there if you would like to get updates on when I go live. Check me out on Twitter. I am twitter.com/InverseTV. My Twitch, which is the stream, twitch.tv/InverseTV. And I'll see you guys tomorrow with the conclusion. See ya.